County Board of Supervisors. We will start with an invocation by Ms. Bender, and Mr. Miller will lead us in the pledge. Please rise.
Please, Lord, guide us in your wisdom to make sure that we protect and look out for all the residents of King George County. Amen.
All right, thank you. Mr. Miller, do we have any amendments to the agenda?
I believe there's some possible corrections to the minutes that Ms. Lackey can explain.
Ms. Lackey?
Good evening. I just wanted to make sure all the supervisors were aware that there was a comment on the draft minutes as they were first posted to your agenda. So a small change has been made just as to who made the motion and who made the second for amending the agenda at the previous meeting. So if that causes anyone to not want it on the consent agenda, just wanted to raise that for your awareness.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lackey. Anything else, Mr. Miller?
No, sir.
Okay. In that case, we'll move on to public comment. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person in order to afford everyone an opportunity to speak. Comments relate to a specific public hearing issue. We ask that you offer those comments at the time of the public hearing. And when you come up, please provide your name and your address.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm James Lynch, 8263 Oakwood Drive, King George. Here to talk about a poetry trail that we have inaugurated on the Dog and Railroad Trail. Last month, we inaugurated a trail that is intended to highlight living Virginia poets. This trail was the instigation of the Virginia Poetry Society and the Virginia Master Naturalist. There are the trail is 1 mile long. It begins at the Indiantown Road parking area and extends a mile east. Along that mile, there are 7 stations with QR codes. One of the imperatives that we had was we wanted to make sure that we weren't over signing the trail. So the QR codes are relatively small, and obviously the way a QR code works, as everybody knows, is that you basically use your smartphone, take a picture of the little code. This will bring up a web page that's unique for each of our stations. The web page has a poem. And it also has a short entry talking about what you're actually looking at there on the trail, whether it's trees or swamp or whatever it is. All of the poems were chosen by the Virginia Poetry Society, and the write-ups were supplied by the Virginia Master Naturalist. So I invite everybody to have a look at it. Mr. Chairman, appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Ana Maria Lobo, and I live in Presidential Lakes. I want to thank you for your service to the community, all of you, the supervisors. But the people in King George elected you to make good decisions for the county, especially when it comes to spending taxes. Last year, after the reassessment, property values increased by almost 40%. The people of King George are not very happy that you raise in taxes. It's okay to pay good salaries to the sheriff's department, rescue squad, and fire department. It's also good to pay good salaries to the school teachers. The problem of teachers' pay has been with us for a long time. Teachers need a living salary. Bus drivers should also have good salaries. They have a hard job. I want to ask the supervisors again to help me, all of you tonight. Mrs. Kapka is not here, but I wanted to get rid of the decal. You've been charging over and over again for many, many years. When the government gets used to having money coming in, it's hard to stop. You need to stop spending so much money. People are not happy in King George with the taxes. Thank you.
Debbie Fairfax, 623 Kings Highway. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, last Tuesday there was unanimous agreement by the Planning Commission and the board to place the noise standards recommended by Berkeley into the new ordinance. Even the data center developer present stated that he could easily meet those standards and took no issue with them. But you and I both know that Birchwood will return prior to the adoption of the new ordinance. How do you plan to protect the people living near the Birchwood site? The reason I've been advocating for special exception for data centers is very, very simple. Only what is proffered by the applicant or codified by the law is legally binding. Birchwood can tell you and show you anything they want, but once hundreds of acres of property are rezoned industrial, since data centers are by right, Birchwood is only bound by what is stipulated in the current zoning ordinance and what they have chosen to proffer. On the last application, Birchwood proffered 70 decibels at the property line. That is 10 times the daytime level agreed upon last week and more than 20 times the nighttime level because of decibels being figured logarithmically. That is insufficient to protect the people living nearby. There are citizens whose homes abut or are quite close to the Butzner property, former Butzner property, and the Ty property. Citizens would like to see Birchwood proffer those noise limits that we agreed upon in the meeting last Tuesday and the enforcement mechanisms. There are citizens whose homes are very close. If you mean to prosper while being a good neighbor, put some teeth to the promise. My refrain has not changed since September 2022. If you feel that these uses are needed for the county's industrial revenue, then please put the standards in place to protect those living nearby before considering and accepting any applications for data centers. You asked the citizens to wait until we got research, analysis, and input from Berkeley, and we did. There was unanimous consensus on the noise recommendations from Berkeley. I've talked to community development, and Berkeley has already drafted the text, so this portion can be adopted as a text amendment to the current ordinance. Citizens would like to see you, the board, adopt that portion of the text as a text, that portion of the ordinance as a text amendment. Please direct staff to begin the process through public hearings with the Planning Commission and Board for adoption of those noise regs into the current ordinance to be utilized and enforced. You have done this text amendment process twice in the last few months in response to the needs of citizens. Please do this again. Thank you.
Todd Fairfax, 623 Kings Highway. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We are very pleased to see at last week's joint session that the board and the Planning Commission all agreed to use performance standards and community design standards for noise and the testing and enforcement thereof to be incorporated in the ordinance overhaul. They were well-written, very appropriate based upon the experience of other localities, and demonstrate your intent to protect the citizens and their properties nearby to industrial uses. But based on the timeline laid out last week by the Berkeley Group, the ordinance overhaul will not be complete and adopted until late this calendar year. The citizens will recall that in November, there was to be a public hearing for Birchwood to rezone more than 500 acres to industrial with up to 10.7 million square feet of industrial constructed space. The applicant requested withdrawal and was approved unanimously. That withdrawal started a 6-month pause for resubmission. That pause is ticking down and will expire the middle of this month. I believe that the board has full knowledge that Birchwood will resubmit their application soon. I ask each member to answer during your individual board reports tonight. When will you direct staff to begin the process to adopt the language of the new use performance standards and community design standards for noise and the testing and enforcement thereof as a text amendment into the current ordinance to be utilized and enforced? This is critically important to these new, better standards that they are in place to govern Birchwood's application. I've heard from only a very few members of the board and planning commission that if we make it too difficult for applicants, they'll go somewhere else. Nonsense. Case in point, between Birchwood's first public hearing in August and their second in November, they purchased the 117-acre former Butzner property for $1.4 million, nearly 2.5 times the assessed value. Does that sound like an applicant who is going somewhere else? Would an applicant spend more money purchasing more property only to leave? No. I say again, nonsense. Please, will you tonight direct staff to adopt the Berkeley Group's language into the current ordinance to be utilized and enforced to protect the citizens and their properties nearby to future industrial uses? We have watched you bring forward 2 other text amendments in the past several months, so the precedent is there. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Arn Eliason, 12,000 LaGrange Lane, King George. Probably everybody understands the responsibility the Board of Supervisors has to find new revenue streams in order to maintain services, fund communication equipment for the sheriff's office, construction of schools, the list goes on. The need to find revenue has to be delicately balanced against the goals of the county to maintain and cherish our rural heritage. So there's a natural tension between encouraging the revenue that growth brings against the need to maintain agriculture and the rural environment. A few months ago, we heard from a young man who regretfully said he didn't recognize King George anymore. You probably remember that gentleman's comments. Last week, we heard from a young lady that her family decided to move to King George County because of its uncrowded rural feel and its safety. Similarly, my family and I moved from suburban DC to escape the congestion, the traffic, the crime, to live in peaceful, beautiful King George. So now I ask the members of the Board of Supervisors as they balance growth versus the environment to keep the long view in mind. Ask yourselves where you want the county to be, not in 2 years, but in 20 years or 30 years, 50 years. Where do you want to live? What kind of place do you want to live in 20 years? Where do you want your children to come back to in 30 years, or where they can live? Rushing forward to invite industry now at the expense of our open fields, our rural field, may be very short-sighted. Development is coming. We all recognize that. But do you really want King George to look like Arlington, Manassas, and no no aspersions intended here, but like Spotsylvania up near I-95, is that what you want King George to look like in order to generate revenues? I'll close with a comment. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? Thank you.
Mr. Dines, is anyone online?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Did anyone receive any correspondence to be entered into the record? Okay, in that case, we will close public comment and we'll move on to reports of members of the board. Ms. Binder.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who came out and spoke. I'll try to get to everything in my, I have quite a few things to go through, but I'm going to go through it fast. First off, I've been contacted a couple of times by my representative on the Landfill Advisory Committee, and I know I reached out to Ms. Lackey. She reached out to me again today because of the meeting on Monday. So I just wanted to make you aware to talk about the makeup of the Landfill Committee and whether we needed to have that on a future agenda. So I just want to throw that out. Because I think there's 2 spots open, if I'm correct, right, Mr. Miller? I think.
I would have to ask staff to indicate that. I know that Mr. Stats is now, was appointed by Ms. Kupka, and of course, the board appointed Mr. Collins, and Mr. Collins appointed Mr. Windsor. And then there's Elodie, who is your appointment, and I think that would possibly leave Mr. Granger and then Mr. Stonehill's seat as well.
Elodie did reach out to me because she's the secretary. She wanted to confirm so we have it all in order, and I think we need to make sure that we have it all correct.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Yep. And then next is I would like to reappoint Roger Nicely to the King George Parks and Rec Committee.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 The opposed, chair votes aye. Motion carries.
So in the last couple of weeks, thank you very much. I have attended quite a few meetings and quite a few workshops. One of them, I did meet with the ham and radio folks again, and they are working really hard with the high school and maybe even the middle school to have a ham radio club. And part of their impetus for doing this is the new administration. They seem to be more open to have that as a club for the students, but they would like to create a network of ham operators that live near seniors to be able to reach out to them during times of crisis or storms, so that they can identify ham radio operators near seniors so they can reach out to them to make sure that they're okay. I think it's a cool idea. I know we talked about it from the storm a year ago, and to reach out to those seniors to make sure that it's okay. It's kind of a novel idea. They haven't flushed it out yet, but that they're taking inroads to work with that. I did attend a workshop with the Community Foundation on board culture and agenda design. It was kind of interesting to hear a different take on setting up agendas, trying to bring it into the 22nd century or 21st century. It was interesting just to hear different things that they had and how to redesign your agenda to make it a little quicker but better and still following Robert's Rules of Order. I also attended the Joint Planning Commission work session on solar and data centers, and we had a very robust discussion. And then capping off the week, I attended the VACO Board of Directors meeting, and one of the most interesting things, and most people know, everywhere across the state of Virginia, they have concerns about teachers' salaries and the budget and everything, trying to balance work-life, whatever you want to call it, and having to raise taxes to provide better salaries for fire, EMS, sheriff's deputies, and teachers. So what I bring that up too is it goes back to our discussion about bringing in economic development. And my position has always been, yes, we do need the revenue. Yes, we do need to be able to find other streams because the landfill will close. But we also need to make sure that we protect our citizens and we have our house in order before we let in big industry. So I agree with the Fairfaxes that I would like to get a consensus from the board to direct staff to begin the process of adopting new performance use and community design standards for noise and the testing and enforcement thereof presented by the Berkeley Group last week as a text amendment in our current ordinance, because we've done it twice. We've done it for pyramid, but because of pyramid healthcare with hospitals, and we did it for the micro wineries. I think we should do that to show good faith to our citizens.
I agree.
Mr. Stonehill, how do you feel?
I think we need to do a little bit more research on it before we do it. I like the idea of it, but I'm just not ready to move on to it right now.
So my biggest concern is this is still not what we're necessarily adopting. This has been a proposal and it's still in the works to be discussed further down the road as well. And it could be modifying as well, you know, as we go along and we receive further feedback. And so our end product might be different than what we'd even be looking to adopt now.
But in that window, somebody could come in.
So you can change it. It doesn't keep you hard and fast to what it is. The Planning Commission and all of us agreed that it was a good idea. Same thing with the hospitals. We know we would take the bull by the horn ahead of time. I don't think it really restrains us to not change it if there's needs to be changes as we go along. But we know that there's things coming up, and I think this is pretty prudent and a very acceptable way to do things.
So what I'm hearing, it's a 2-2 tie. So the motion, well, the consensus fails, basically.
Well, not yet. Mr. Granger was thinking.
I mean, we did it twice. I mean, it's a fair, we've heard this from him. I will tell you, at the VACO Board of Directors, I was approached from a Loudoun County supervisor who has heard that the surrounding area seems to be a target for data centers, and they talked to me about noise ordinances and what they should have done that they didn't know. So it is known in this, you know, all around the state, especially Governor Youngkin's press release, that, you know, data centers are looking at this whole area, and they just wanted to give us their best practices and which they wish that they had in place at the time the data centers came to their residents. And they admitted they bring a lot of revenue.
Mr. Miller, could you reach out to staff and ask what would be, I'll be honest, I'm not ready to move forward with it just to say move forward with it tonight, but I would like to understand, because if we're going to make text amendments, I do still have concerns that we have a moving target currently with both those others. We knew what we were looking for. We were looking to say hospitals will be by special exception only because of the situation that we had. We were looking for micro wineries to be an allowed usage, and these are still being developed ordinances. And so we don't have a final product yet, and to say we want to take it on, I'm not sure I'm ready to do that, but I would like to also understand from the staff perspective. I know historically, as we've made further and further text amendments and you try to shoehorn them into our current ordinances, is this something that would be able to be done? Or how big of an effort is it in order to create the text amendments that could be put into our current ordinances as they are written versus where it's all being crafted together and so it all fits nicely? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Sure. So right now, we know there's going to be some future applications. And in the vein of the future applications, we want them to know where to shoot. So right now they're shooting in the dark. This would at least give them a start. Now, if we change it, we have every right to do so. But I think it's fair to the citizens, fair to the companies to have somewhere they can meet, as opposed to starting off with something that they could never meet. You know, so I think it's not just for the citizens, it's for the companies, it's for everyone involved in the process. And we know we have to have a public hearing, so it's going to take some time. So it still leaves time. So that's why I would encourage you to consider it again.
I certainly will bring it back at the next meeting to discuss again. I would like to understand the question I had for Mr. Miller. But yes, I will continue to consider it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last thing I had from the VACO Board of Directors meeting, it was brought up about there's I forget, it was a House bill or Senate bill that has created a work group to convene to study fire and emergency medical services and the effect on localities and the pay structure and the state mandates. So they're going to provide additional resources that would assist local governments with the recruitment, retention, training, and support of first responders, fire EMS personnel, and 911 dispatchers. And they're also going to go into maybe the state can kick in some money to help us be competitive so that we can retain our staff. So I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bender. Mr. Collins?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see everybody. Thanks for all the public comment. I listen intently every time for everything that's said. And when I'm out and about, I hear more public comment one-on-one. I just want to bring up the Landfill Advisory Committee. Right now, the charter and the bylaws don't match. So there's some problems. First, there's a problem with me being on it because the charter doesn't allow for that, even though the Board of Supervisors, so I think we had to change the charter. Is that correct, Ms. Lackey, to allow me to be on it?
So the charter provides for 5 appointees and then 2 positions based on their own employment position. One is a member of the waste management team, and one is traditionally a county waste employee. So a few weeks back, or I guess probably months even at this point in time, there was action by the board to appoint Mr. Collins to the Landfill Advisory Committee. There was discussion that there was not, quote, a board representative on that committee. But as Supervisor Bender has indicated, there's been some question as to whether the intent was to add a 6th position, a board representative, to the Landfill Advisory Committee, or whether the intent was that Mr. Collins would serve as one of the appointed positions on behalf of a particular district. It's complicated by the fact that there has been a large appointee appointed since the motion was made, I will note, by Ms. Kupka to appoint Mr. Collins, but she didn't specify that it was for her district, and she subsequently appointed someone else to her from her district. Because she's not here tonight, I will go and say, from her perspective, the action of the board at that meeting was to add the additional my numbers are off. You have your 5 citizen appointees and your 2 members, and to add an additional member as your board representative. So that was her takeaway from prior actions of the board. But to the extent that there needs to be any additional discussion of that or clarification by the board, I would entertain that. And also to Supervisor Collins's point, there have been some recommendations for other structural and reorganizational changes by the Landfill Advisory Committee itself. I intend to attend the next Landfill Advisory Committee next week, and then I'd like to report back to the board on that. But if there is interest in the board on clarifying the membership of the committee, that's something that can be done if you all wish to do it at this meeting.
So what occurred at the last meeting? So there's someone that's been appointed for 2 years that's never shown up and will not return phone calls or mail or anything like that. So the landfill committee wanted to remove them because obviously they're not interested in being on there anymore. But the bylaws didn't allow us to do that. So there was a lot of questions between the bylaws and the charter. Also, the 2 advisory members, the landfill, Mr. Newchuck and Pete, waste management, what their role is, and the charter says one thing, and we say another. They're not voting members. Only the 5 members are supposed to be voting. We were trying to clear that up. It's still not clear. it's hard to have a meeting when you can't get a quorum, or if it's not a valid quorum. So we just need some clarification from the board. Ms. Lackey, I hope will bring that up sooner than later so we can take care of that and move on. Last meeting, I voted as a member. So don't even know if that was a valid. Matter of fact, they elected me chairman. I don't even know if that's valid. So, so we need some clarification from the board of how you want to go about this. Ms. Lackey, I was hoping that you would take that task on very soon if we have a consensus from the board.
How's the board feel? I'm fine with Ms. Lackey taking on, making some modifications. So I guess the question would be about how to craft it exactly. And so are you, were you looking for something in particular, Mr. Collins? A particular structure?
First, to put me in a place, not necessarily in a, so I have appointed somebody from my district.
Correct.
And so I'm on here, but there's nothing in the charter that allows me to be on there. But the board appointed me on there. So we just need a bunch of clarification on the charter and the bylaws of what we can and can't do and where the structure lies. It's not really that tough. It just needs to be brought back in front of the board and take a look at it and make those decisions.
Okay.
It should be a short item to take care of. Next, I would like to appoint Guy Booth to the James Monroe Board of Zoning Appeals.
So,
I recommend
okay.
For my district.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion properly seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you. And we talk about salaries of everyone and what the future lies, and we have to look at what we have. We have to look at the revenues that we have. So the last meeting on our budget, we had some of the revenues or projected revenues and how much we might have, but we don't know how much we're going to have. We don't know what's going to happen with the General Assembly. Last night I was at an event where our senator was there, and he said pretty much that everybody agrees of most of the things, that there's a few amendments that will probably carry out to the end of June until after the primaries are done. But he said pretty much things are agreed upon, but they're just going to wait until after that. So, because it is a political year for those folks. So I think that the 5% salary will be a go on both sides. I don't think that's going to be an issue. Our issue will be how to fund the ones that aren't funded by the state, which is the SOQ positions. So we also have to worry about our other workers in the county, that they have a fair living wage. And I think that Mr. Messler will be bringing some stuff forward on those things tonight, or maybe next meeting. Process tonight. But after we get to the process, we're going to have to come to some hard decisions on what to do. And just so you know, everybody knows that there's a lot of, number one, we got to take care of our debt problem. We have a big debt problem. We have got to do something with debt mitigation like we had been doing. There's no doubt that some of these businesses that want to come into King George would help us out a lot. But we have to be ready for them. We're going to have to do something with the preschool. It's just anybody who's gone there, everybody will come back with the same thing. It needs to be taken care of. It should have been taken care of 15 years ago. 20 years ago, I had my child in there. I wouldn't put anybody's child in there right now. The other thing is we're going to need another elementary school. And then we all know about the projects that are still sitting looming out there. When the courthouse moves, we have the courthouse that has to be taken care of. We still have the old middle school. We have a lot of projects that need to be taken care of. And the dump money, or the landfill, I'm sorry, landfill money, you know, that's all that money is already pretty much spoken for. So we have to bring in business, we have to bring it in smartly, and we have to pay attention to the money. And as Ms. Level says, don't raise taxes and spend money wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Mr. Stonehill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to say thanks for everybody coming out. Ms. Lavelle, nobody up here wants to raise taxes, so we're going to do everything in our power not to do that, because we all have to pay them just as much as you do. Fairfax's, thanks for coming out like usual and providing all of your information. My not wanting to move forward tonight on that, don't take that as I'm against that. I am very much for that. We need to do a bit more research on it. But like I had said in the past, we just need to make sure that everything is in place to bring businesses in as much as we can. Mr. Lynch, thank you for that information, wherever you may be, and there you are. And that was very interesting on the poetry trail. I will definitely have to go look over that as well. And for my report, just wanted to say thank you for the, since we were here last time, we've been to 2 budget meetings since we were all here together, and the 20th and the 27th. Just wanted to say thank you for staff and all the finance department, all the information that we have. I know we have one, I guess, Friday night as well. Just also about the joint meeting with the Planning Commission. It was very informative, and it was good to be able to sit and speak with all those guys as well to see what's going on, and just to get with them to see about the new things that are coming in town. And that's all I have, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Stonehill. I'll just say thank you to everyone who came out and provided comment. As Mr. Collins said, I agree. We do have a number of capital projects that we are aware of in the pipeline coming very soon, and addressing how to fund those is very important. So obviously looking at what kind of business could help to offset those costs, because obviously you don't want the taxpayer to bear the cost of all of those, and it wouldn't be reasonable. So I do hear what everyone has to say in regards to being careful about the development, but as well as providing services, because those services are very important to everyone in this community. So it's a matter of balancing that. How do we pay for the things we need and protect all the citizens? So we're continuing to look at that. So we're working our way forward. As Mr. Stonehill said, we did have a couple budget sessions. I would like to say thank you to staff. We do seem to have a little bit of unknowns in regards to the revenues, I think with the schools in particular, and those SUQ positions, and the school funding increase at the state level. So we do have a planned meeting this Friday, as Mr. Collins said, to discuss more about the revenues. And hopefully we'll have a more clear picture coming out of that in order to help the schools be able to have a plan forward so they can get their contracts out. As everyone, I'm sure, is aware, teachers are, there's a limited number of teachers out there, and we're all vying for having their services. And so making sure our community is able to attract and retain those teachers is obviously very important to help to make sure that our children are educated. So getting that information as soon as possible so that the schools can move forward with their answers as well is very important. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, and we will close the reports from members of the board. Mr. Collins?
Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I take one more shot at you two guys on this text amendment?
I've made my decision, so I'll be honest, I'm not moving forward at this point.
Mr. Stonehill, could I take one more shot at you?
I'll listen briefly.
Okay. So, you know, when we were talking about the noise and the solar and all that stuff, you know, as far as more research and so forth, that's what the Berkeley group, they hired the Berkeley group to come in and do that. And they've come in and done that, and they've given us the recommendations, and we've accepted their recommendations. So I'm not sure that we need to do any more research at this point in order to do the text amendment. So I'd really appreciate if you would be in consensus to adopt the text amendments. I'd really appreciate it.
I think I'm going to stay where I was before. And if the chairman said that he's going to bring this up maybe at the next meeting, get some information, how it would look, and Mrs. Lackey can put it together and then bring it to us. And then I'll look at it at that time. But like I said, I'm not against it.
Well, thank you for considering. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Okay. We move on to county officials' reports. Report of the county attorney, Ms. Lackey.
Good evening. Since a couple supervisors raised it in their reports, I will say that, as I explained, the charter for the Landfill Advisory Committee only currently calls for the 5 appointments, but as it's an advisory only function, I don't see that it's problematic to have a board representative. So if there was the will of the board this evening to clarify that there was, or to ratify the appointment of a board representative, that's an action that you all could take this evening, and I could bring some more information from the Landfill Advisory Committee in the future. But if you wanted to clarify that tonight, you could.
Also, my colleagues, are you willing to take that on and would officially codify that Mr. Collins is serving in that role as the board appointee would be allowed?
Do we need a motion for that? All right, I'll make a motion to codify by having Mr. Collins be the Board of Supervisors representative on the Landfill Advisory Committee. Does that work?
Anyone second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion probably seconded. Do we have any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Okay. Moving along to items in the agenda package. The proposed IGSA, which is the Intergovernmental Support Agreement, that was a presentation, originated the presentation that some representatives on behalf of Fort AP Hill made to this board at its March 7th meeting. At the March 7th meeting, there was consensus from the board to direct me to continue negotiating potential terms of a contract whereby the county would allow the Army garrison to avail itself of use of the county's consultants. In particular, they're interested in using architectural and engineering consultants. I guess it just proves pretty cumbersome for them to go out and to solicit their own. There is a federal statute that provides for this arrangement of an intergovernmental support agreement whereby a local government can serve as a sole source from which contracts can be drawn from that local government to the federal agency. So in your agenda packet is the current draft of a proposed agreement. There's likely to be a few more tweaks, but the major terms are there, by which the county would get a 10% administrative fee for passing through the services of its consultants, which would be limited only to architectural and engineering contracts in the first year. And then it would require an amendment and agreement of both parties to add any additional services to that contract. The county has an existing IGSA with Naval Support Activities South Potomac for dumpster and trash removal services. That agreement has been in place since 2021. It appears to be going well. I haven't heard otherwise. The positives of such an arrangement are that we, the county, can share our resources with another public entity, and we can obtain some financial benefit from doing so. Negatives are that all risks cannot be totally minimized. The county would be indemnified by its consultants, but ultimately the county would be a pass-through. We would be the contracting party with the garrison. So I can't say that there's not potential for the county getting involved as an intermediary of those kind of disputes, but we've attempted to negotiate terms that minimize that risk and limit the types of contracts, although the types of contracts that they're interested in are professional services contracts. Under the Virginia Code, architectural and engineering contracts that are on an on-call basis, so that's where they have hourly rates, scope of services, but by task order, they deliver services. Those are capped at $10 million in aggregate and $2.5 million per project. But as you can see, those could be potentially large tasks. The garrison is very interested in pursuing the support agreement. In fact, they wanted to present tonight, but since we don't have a fully negotiated agreement just yet, we're very close. The recommendation of Mr. Miller and myself was that I would go ahead and just give an update on the status of that agreement. And the garrison representatives would be interested in making another presentation to you all at your next meeting if you desire to continue exploring this relationship.
I would say yes. Let's bring it back to the next meeting and we can discuss it at that point.
The number has been set at 10%.
10%, that kind of came out of their presentation. They said that they had seen that number in prior contracts, so that's kind of where that number was derived from.
Mr. Chairman, again, I will not agree with that. Working on that contract. Reason is that they'll be using county employees for the purpose of these contracts, which they already have plenty of work to do here in the county. And number two, Caroline County doesn't want to do it with them. That's their home county. Neither does Essex and neither does Spotsylvania. So that ought to be some red flags for us. I'm not sure what the red flags are on why they didn't want to do it, but we should figure that out. Thank you.
Ms. Bender?
I just have one question. Is there any way to find out from that? I mean, we could call them on the phone, but maybe what the concerns of why Caroline doesn't have an agreement with them?
You know, and speaking with the county attorney and their public utilities director, they indicated that the AP Hill was looking for a lot more from them than what they're looking for from us. They were looking for actually like taking care of facilities, and if there was an emergency that they would do snow removal for them. And they just said it was just that would have been too cumbersome for the county to take on. And so they indicated that they weren't interested in that. I'm sure there's other things, but we can find out. We can get a more direct information from them.
All right, thank you.
Are you still interested in seeing it brought back at the next meeting? Okay.
Just need clarifying information.
Mr. Stonehill? You're okay. Yes. So please bring it back at the next meeting.
Okay. And the other item that I had on the agenda was an update on the King George County seal. At the last meeting, there was some brief discussion about a request that was made to Mr. Miller by the Historical Society to authorize the use of the county seal on T-shirts and some other merchandise that the Historical Society is interested in selling. And I have circulated a draft permission authorization to all the supervisors for your review and comment. The essential terms would be that it would limit usage to certain types of merchandise, which is in keeping with my understanding what the Historical Society has sold in the past, such as T-shirts, Christmas ornaments, those kind of items. It would require annual reissuance, and it would limit the use of profits, or the proceeds from selling of that merchandise to operational and programmatic expenditures for the nonprofit. No license fee is proposed, and that would be setting a precedent, but it wouldn't be a precedent that would necessarily be problematic. There's a Virginia code section that provides that local governments can make direct donations to certain nonprofit organizations, which do include organizations that commemorate historical events. So this is of the type of nonprofits that if the board so wanted to, could make a direct donation to. So I don't see it as problematic if it's the policy of the board to set a precedent of not requiring a license fee under the specific terms of this proposed use agreement to a nonprofit that is restricted to using any profits from sale of merchandise with the county seal to operational and programmatic expenditures. There would also require, as a requirement, that they would need pre-approval from the county of graphics if it's anything on the merchandise other than the county seal and either King George County and or Historical Society, if they're making any kind of other statements or things like that that they would require approval. So that's the proposal for a proposed license agreement for use of the county seal, which the county trademarked in 2021.
Ms. Lackey, when I read that proposal, it also said that it can be revoked at any time. Is that still in there?
It is. So they would require a 1-year reissuance, but it could be revoked at any time. So if the board had a change in policy or direction or saw any kind of misuse, it could be revoked.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I had mentioned this to you after the meeting is I just wanted to make sure whatever merchandise they had, they can still sell it with the seal because they were incorporated in 1997. So they might have a lot of ornaments and that are left over and they're still able to sell that, correct?
Right. We can take a look at that drafting and of course the Historical Society might have some small tweaks that I could bring back to you. But if there's a consensus that you're satisfied with the draft, I could circulate it to it. But I believe the draft says something like t-shirts, ornaments, gift shop type items. Nothing that disparages the county is what is specified.
And books would be included in that, correct? Because they've done some pictorials.
So if they have existing books, that would kind of fall into that area of whatever existed before the trademark existed. But so if they had a book with a particular title under this license, if they were issuing a new book and it had some kind of title and they wanted the King George County seal, they would have to get approval from the county. So if you all wanted to specify the agent on behalf of the county who does that, or I could bring it back to you whenever we have those types of requests, we could do it that way.
Well, I bring it up because I know there's a couple of old books, including their pictorial, they would like to reprint because people have had interest in it. So is a reprinting of a book that has already been copyrighted, or is that just something you need to look into?
I can take a look at that specific issue.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Lackey?
I'm satisfied with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Lackey, was there anything else?
That's all I have.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. In that case, we'll move on to presentations and reports. So we'll start with the salary survey presentation.
Good evening, Chairman and board members. As you know, we've heard salaries is a hot topic, especially for schools, but also for the county. That is why previous to this budget, you've instructed staff to do a salary survey. We're at a point in time now where I'd like to kind of give you an update of where we are and give you some more information on that process. So we've gone through the RFP process. We have selected PayPoint HR as our vendor for the county's classification and compensation survey. They understand their objectives, and their objectives are to assess, go to market, and bring back us market data so that we can make future decisions, potentially with data on salaries. So this week we are kicking off a process where we are spending time with employees and leaders to educate them on the steps of the process. And I've asked Dr. Rick Campbell, Technical Director of PayPoint HR, to come give you a high-level brief overview so that you understand the process, where we are, and what's expected, and an expected timeline on that. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Rick Campbell.
Thank you, sir. So our process is fairly straightforward. The kind of the hallmark or the underpinnings of it is to be transparent to all parties, so that everybody at the end of the day is operating from the same set of facts. So that would include the Board of Supervisors, that would include employees certainly, and also management. And then everyone, based on that set of facts, make intelligent decisions on what's appropriate, whether it's employees on if this is the best place for them to continue to be employed, or other alternatives may be important to them, and also relative to the board on where you want to position the county strategically relative to compensation. But again, part of the process, the most important part, is really to be transparent to all parties. That's in principle why having an outside, third party that has no stake in this process is important, so that again, those three different groups can believe the results. Over the next couple of days, and actually earlier this morning, we had meetings with this morning with the department heads, and over the next 2 days with employees to cover these things. One of the things that we're going to cover is to really to set expectations on what the results are going to look like, so that there is no surprises, that we're not promising something up front and then pulling the wool or pulling the carpet from underneath them and misleading them throughout the process. So as part of the expectations, and it's important that you know it as well, there will be a group of job titles that are paid lower here at King George than other municipalities, and that's principally why you have a study. But there will also be a group of job titles that are paid right in alignment with where they should be. And then there'll be a third group of job titles that are paid better here at King George than in other places. I've been doing this for more than a decade, and that's happened in every study that I've ever done. Now, how many job titles are in each group, to be determined. I don't know that in advance. But again, it's important that people have that expectation going forward, that while everyone would like a pay raise, as part of the process, that's not the reasonable expectation. You may fall into one of those other categories. Now, I also mentioned that if you fall into that category of a job title that's paid better here at King George, that does not mean you're overpaid. That's, to be clear, that is just something that the county has valued more highly than other organizations, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just a priority. So the process itself, we basically break it out into 3 yardsticks, and we try to use examples like this so it's it's clear and as transparent as possible. The first yardstick we use is we look at what the external market is paying for similar work. And I use the word similar work, not similar positions, because positions at one place can be called something vastly different than at another place. So collecting that information directly from the HR departments and what people are actually getting paid versus Googling on salary.com and asking what people say they make. And those are actually vastly different values. The second yardstick that we use in this process is looking at an org structure. So typically in most organizations, the individual at the top gets paid the most, and as you work your way down the organization, salaries fall accordingly. The third yardstick that we use is we look at knowledge, skills, and abilities, and this is where the involvement in employees is a critical part of the process. They have a better understanding of what they do on a day in, day out basis better than anyone, and the knowledge, skills, and abilities that's actually required to do the job well. We'll make an emphasis to employees that this isn't a performance review. This is just trying to gather as much information as we possibly can about their functions, so that it can be properly evaluated. We will have a checks and balances part of this looking at the knowledge, skills, and abilities. So we will ask department heads to weigh in on the same job titles that they supervise, so that we can, at the end of the day, come competently in front of the board and say, these are facts, and these are true facts. Part of PayPoint's job at the end is to statistically combine these 3 disparate data sets to produce what makes sense for King George. Now, the final part in the process will be selecting where the county wants to be strategically. Most organizations start off with wanting to be in the middle of the market. That's typically where we're asked to be. But there's physical implications for that kind of recommendation. So based on that first cut of results, if you will, and what is financially possible, then, further adjustments, may be, a part of the process. Some organizations that we've worked with, certainly in the past year, because of the high level inflation, they've tried to get ahead of the curve and be better than the middle of the market. That's good and fine if, the budget is there. Other communities, because of other physical commitments, whether it's schools or, new police stations or what have you, in year one, they can't make, all the adjustments they would like to in salaries. And that's good and fine, as long as it's part of the process, you communicate that to employees that this is our goal, this is where we want to get to relative to salaries, and this is our plan going forward. In case you can't be, at the level that you want to be in the first year. But that's the process. Again, this information that I'm conveying to you is going to be conveyed to employees. So again, that the process is, open and transparent, and that everyone can believe at the end of the day that these are just simple facts, and for everybody to make intelligent decisions based on that. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Collins?
Will you be addressing compression issues?
Yes.
Thank you.
Spender.
How many localities or surrounding areas are you going to look at to come up with your comparisons?
The process is typically we draw a nice big circle around King George, and then look at the socioeconomic factors of all the communities kind of in that area. I try to be nebulous about that term because in some municipalities that distance can be quite large. Depends on how sparse communities are. Other times it can be very narrow. I've done a study where that circle around the organization was 30 miles because there was so many other comparative organizations. But the most critical part of it in selecting the number really is that you have a large enough data set that one place doesn't artificially skew the results. So for instance, if you were to only pick, say, a 50-mile radius and you were heavily weighted on Northern Virginia as part of that demographic that you choose, well, where King George is falling relative to Falls Church or Fairfax or Spotsylvania is going to be at the lower end of the spectrum. You could also pick places further south and you'd be at the higher end. At the end of the day, what we try to do and present in the report is to select a sufficient number of communities that are socioeconomically similar. So you get rid of the Falls churches, if you will, because of the median household pricing or the median household income kind of values will show that they are substantially different than King George. But it goes both directions, whether it's too high or too low, so that at the end of the day, that the sample set that you're using is a fair representation.
I bring that up because, as you know, in our planning district 16, there's a big discrepancy between Stafford and King George, or King George and Spotsylvania. Big population difference in the amount that 1 penny in tax increases raises. So, but bringing up something you just said is the uniqueness of King George, and understanding that we have a high median income, but we do have a lot of lower income also. And we get skewed a lot when we look for grants and that, because they look at our median, not understanding that there's another side to King George that we need to be aware of. So are you going to look at that also?
Sure. So as part of the process, the statistics that we use is we're looking at percentiles versus looking exclusively at an average, where the places like the Spotsylvania can skew the average, where it's less likely to skew, a percentile, because that is just a counting kind of statistic. But to answer your question, yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
I did have questions, but you just answered most of them right there about who and how you got to your numbers where you're coming up with. And as Mrs. Bender said, we do have, a big employer here in the county that we have a lot of salaries way up here, and then we have a lot of salaries down here. So it's very kind of, not even. So yes, you just answered all my questions. That's all I had. Thank you.
Mr. Campbell, or Dr. Campbell, I apologize. Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it. All right, move on to the Public Service Recognition Week.
Trying something new. All right, good evening, Chair and Board of Supervisors. Again, May 17th, May 7th through the 13th of 2003 is Public Service Recognition Week. Since 1985, this week has been used to recognize those who serve in public service at all levels from federal to local government. It is also the week to educate others about the work that we do and the different career opportunities that there are in public service. During this week, we are going to have a time of celebration for our current employees. That's going to be Wednesday here in the boardroom. We're going to have some cake and have some recognition of the work that our employees do for our citizens. We're also going to take some opportunities via social media with Ms. Southall about promoting public service jobs, what we do in the county. So we're going to be utilizing some of that outreach, starting some of that outreach about educating people about what it is to do to work with the county. So simply tonight I'm asking you to join me in recognizing those that serve the citizens of King George County and on those that serve on the federal level and state level during this upcoming Public Service Week. In front of you, you do have a resolution to commemorate, and I would like you to adopt this resolution to commemorate Public Service Week from May 7th to the 13th of 2023.
So I'm going to ask, I know we chatted about this beforehand, but it is the resolution is not in the board packet. It was handed out, but just so that the public can hear, I don't think this is a very controversial resolution, but if you would read it, I would appreciate it, yes.
So it's a state's resolution to commemorate Public Service Recognition Week from May 7th through the 13th of 2023, whereas the week of May 7th through May 13th, 2023 has been designated as Public Service Recognition Week to honor the employees of federal, state, and local governments who provide critical services to the United States and to the communities. And whereas Public Service Recognition Week provides the opportunity to acknowledge and promote the important contributions of public servants in King George County, and whereas public service is a noble calling that enables communities to benefit greatly from the knowledge and expertise of highly trained individuals who become public servants as a means of contributing to the present and future well-being of their communities, and whereas the ability of King George County as a local government to be responsive, innovative, and effective in service to its residents is credited to the outstanding performance of its dedicated employees. Now therefore, be it resolved by the King George County Board of Supervisors to, number one, proclaim the week of May 7th through May 13th, 2023 as Public Service Recognition Week in King George County, Virginia. 2, to call upon a new generation to consider a career in public service as an honorable profession. 3, express gratitude to those who have selflessly accepted the call to serve their communities. And 4, commend public service of federal, state, and local levels for their outstanding contributions to this country and this community, not only during this week of May, but each week throughout the year.
All right. Thank you for reading it, Mr. Messler. So this is the resolution, and I know there's a request to have it approved.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Okay. I'll move on to action items. We have the resolution to authorize regional applications to the Opioid Abatement Authority for regional opioid abatement efforts. Ms. Lackey.
So I have been among the many staff members who've been part of a working group who've been kind of tracking grant opportunities. We've had some discussions with potential partners for uses of opioid abatement funds. And that's kind of culminated in the fact that May 5th is the close of the application period for the first round of regional partnership grants administered by the Opioid Abatement Authority. And at the April 4th Board of Supervisors meeting, you heard a presentation by the Executive Director of the Rappahannock Area Community Services Board, who kind of gave you his pitch for the proposal for a regional opioid abatement project. Specifically, there is an existing 12-bed facility for crisis stabilization in Fredericksburg. It's called the Sunshine Lady House. It has had to discontinue detox beds due to a lack of funding in 2020. So the request is that King George County, from among the funds that were directly distributed from opioid settlements, that King George County fund 9% of the costs of reestablishing and expanding medical detox at the Sunshine Lady House. So this is a regional project of which King George County's share is to fund 9% of the costs, and that number comes from the percentage of people served by the Rappahannock Area Community Services Board. By their calculations, King George County residents represent 9% of their population. So this is a proposal that would be using funds that were directly allocated to King George. The regional grant opportunity through the Opioid Abatement Authority does not require a local match, but it has scoring criteria that weights your application based on a local match. So the first part of the proposal is that this be used as a local match, which again, it's not optional, but it does help your application for the regional application. So the second part is that the member jurisdictions of Planning District 16 would collectively pursue a partnership of a regional grant from the Opioid Abatement Authority for the next fiscal year, and it's proposed that you would seek renewal for an additional 4 years to provide a mobile medication-assisted treatment program. So currently there is an office-based medication-assisted treatment program in Fredericksburg, but not everybody can easily get there. And if there's barriers to people pursuing their recovery, then that's something that they think they can address by having a mobile team. So the mobile team in the first year, that would require the expenditures for purchases of a vehicle, and the vehicle would visit each of the member jurisdictions at least once a week to provide treatment services to people where they live, where they work, in their own community. So that is the proposed regional grant application. The first year costs would be $695,704. And in subsequent years, the cost would be slightly reduced because the first year would require the expenditure for the vehicle. After that, it's just maintenance of the vehicle and then your staffing and your supplies. So the proposed resolution, it would be a partnership with the other communities in Planning District 16. Caroline County, the city of Fredericksburg, and Spotsylvania County have already approved applying for the grant. The Stafford County Board of Supervisors is considering it tonight. And Stafford County staff are proposing that Stafford County be the fiscal agent for the project. Even though the program would be run through the Community Services Board, the grant criteria requires that the applicant be a local government and the fiscal agent be a local government. So Stafford is presuming that their board approves it tonight, would be carrying the ball in that court. Jonathan Franklin was not able to attend tonight. But he has submitted a letter of support that's included in your agenda package. And I'm just getting an update from Mr. Miller that Stafford Board has approved. So King George would be the final piece of the puzzle to submit this regional application. And the regional application would, if granted, it would cover those full costs for that mobile medication assisted treatment. It would not expend all the resources. You'll recall that just a few months ago, we approved another opioid settlement. So they're still working through what the distributions will be. So there's other opportunities for additional things, but this would be a way to expend some of those opioid funds and seek some of the regional funds that are available through the state, through this grant program. So I'm available for questions.
Any questions? Go ahead, Ms. Bender.
Yes, one question. What kind of vehicle and how do they identify? As you said, it was mobile, so would there be like a report to the hospital, or is that really clarified? How would they identify who needs it?
I am not aware of those specifics. I think I think they're mobile to the point. My understanding is that they can actually go to people's homes, or they can even visit, homeless campsites and things like that if they had to. They're available to go to people where the needs can be met, and they can provide the drug testing. They can provide the medication assistance to help people through the withdrawal process.
Okay, thank you.
So this is expending the money from the opioid abatement, nothing else from the county, is that correct?
So it would be only opioid abatement funds, no general funds. It would be approximately 22,000 for the local match that's proposed, but that would be through the direct proceeds of the settlement. And then the funds for the medication assisted treatment, the MAT program, that would be subject to award of the grant.
Any other questions?
Ms. Bender, I was just saying that they don't give a type of vehicle. They're just saying it's like $175,000. Mrs. Lackey, I guess these percentages, like the Caroline or the King George percentage, and that 62,000, that's with the match as well, I guess.
So that number is from the regional allocation. So the opioid settlement, there's certain funds that get distributed directly to the jurisdictions. And then there's certain funds that the state operates as a pass-through, and they can decide. They've said that there's no quote unquote earmarks, but by statute, they have to divide it by region roughly equally. So there's not quite an earmark, but there's kind of a guide. And I'm assuming that that's how the CSBs kind of looked to their proposal based on their expectations of what funding is available through the state program.
And just one last question, I don't know for you or possibly Sheriff Giles, are these monies available to you or Chief Moody for like Narcan, stuff like that, the opiate monies?
So I would certainly invite the sheriff to elaborate, but my understanding is there's a current funding source for Narcan. So one of the proposals from the CSB that's not part of this proposal would be to expand that program. That's something that we could consider, but if Sheriff's nodding his head, that we believe we have adequate current resources to maintain the level of support that we have currently in King George.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
So I'll just move to, let's see, I guess adopting the motion as proposed.
I would entertain a motion to adopt the resolution to authorize regional application to the Opioid Abatement Authority for regional opioid abatement efforts as presented.
Yes.
So moved?
Second.
Okay. We have motion properly seconded. Do we have any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Do we need two motions there?
So
Those are
there
two.
is a second item I wanted to give a little more information on. It's a separate independent action, but it is related to the opioid abatement expenditures. So the each opioid settlement, each distributor and manufacturer, all the settlement agreements nationwide, they're all slightly different, but they have a lot of commonalities. The Attorney General's office has issued guidance that gives a lot of the commonalities and notes what those are. So in order to provide an incentive for jurisdictions to abide by what they consider a gold standard for expenditures, the Opioid Abatement Authority is offering a potential bonus of 25% of funds that it distributes. So what your expectation for distribution is, they're bumping it up by 25% if you agree to participate in the gold standard. The gold standard means that you're going to go ahead and you're going to exceed what the settlement requirements are, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because in that way you're not going to be in a position in the future where you're likely to have to reimburse those costs. It also means a level of transparency and reporting that will go on from the county or its fiscal agent in the case of if the grant's awarded. Stafford would be the fiscal agent. But there is a separate resolution in your packet should you wish to opt into the gold standard in exchange for the incentive. You don't have to commit to it for the full 15 years of the opioid settlement. The proposed resolution just has it for the first 2 fiscal years because that's the current grant application cycle. It can be extended in the future if you so choose.
Anybody have any questions or? All right, then I will move that to adopt the resolution to authorize execution of incentive application to the Virginia Opioid Abatement Authority for increased local opioid abatement funding.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, Ms. Lackey, you have another one.
Okay, and the final action item this evening is kind of a unique situation. It's a request for authorization to execute a letter of support so that the Department of Defense would relinquish exclusive jurisdiction over naval support activities South Potomac on a limited basis. Specifically in 2019, there was a Department of Navy memo that required that naval facilities consider relinquishing exclusive federal jurisdiction for certain purposes. And the purpose is largely criminal investigation and prosecution of juveniles who don't fall under the military code of conduct. By policy and practice, federal installations lack mechanisms for seeking criminal recourse for juvenile offenders. And although you can have civil recourse, civil penalties for certain acts, there is a concern nationwide, and I want to be clear that this is not brought on by any particular incident at Dahlgren. This is a proactive action, so that in the event that there were to be a crime, and in particular a sex crime committed by a juvenile offender, if there was no longer exclusive federal jurisdiction, then the Commonwealth's attorney and the sheriff's office could be involved. And Sheriff Giles is here, so he can elaborate if he would like. But Sheriff Giles and Commonwealth's attorney, Carrie Gussman, have submitted letters of support that is in your agenda packet. So they are supportive of this initiative, but they did want me to make clear that they wanted the board to be aware that they might be in a position in the future where they would need to ask for additional resources. We don't know what additional resources will be needed. We don't know how active this might be. But at this stage, the request is a resolution for a letter of support that would begin the Navy's own internal process for the fancy word in the federal statute is for retrocession of exclusive federal jurisdiction solely for the purposes of concurrent jurisdiction over juvenile criminal behavior.
Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Collins.
So does this mean that the sheriff's office will investigate juvenile crimes on base?
Yes, so if they would have to result ultimately probably in an arrangement whereby investigations would be cooperative with the federal forces, and they would bring in people who are accustomed to dealing with the particular mechanics of dealing with juveniles and dealing with sexual misconduct.
So that's a Navy base, it's federal property. So will King George be prosecuting them in the local court or the federal court if the offense happened on the base?
So the proposal, if it comes to fruition, would be that they would be prosecuted in state court.
Okay.
Under state law.
So the military would not be involved in the prosecution or investigation of juvenile crime on base?
Right, so currently they are limited in what actions that they can take by a juvenile offender. So this would provide for a mechanism whereby they could share any evidence, any investigation that they have. Um, but I think the primary investigation would be by the folks who would be responsible for eventually to be involved with the prosecution in the state court through the sheriff's office and through the Commonwealth Attorney's office.
So if a juvenile destroys something on base, the sheriff's office would be responsible for investigating?
Correct. So there's of course a level of discretion and enforcement which they would have to use, but they if they were called upon to investigate something, then they would be authorized to do so if there was concurrent jurisdiction.
Mr.
So
Chair.
right now, they're, with the juveniles in the county, I would assume that you're very, very busy, from what I understand. What kind of workload would that be putting on the sheriff's office to be enforcing the laws, state laws on the base?
I actually reached out to the assistant chief down there to find out how many calls for service they do get involving juveniles, and he said 3 to 4 a year.
Is there any provisions for the federal government to reimburse us for our work on the base?
There's not.
Sorry, no?
No.
So you, Sheriff, you are for this?
I'm not against it, but I mean, I know that's a play on words, but I don't think that it would really be a huge workload on us at this point. I mean, obviously I can't speak for the future, but at this point, I don't think the workload will be there based on the information I received from the assistant chief.
How long would the agreement be? Is it yearly or is it,
So this would be indefinite. This would be permanent and as permanent as things in life are.
so could we, the sheriff's office, Commonwealth Attorney, pull out of it, the agreement? But once you're in the agreement, are you bound by that agreement forever?
So if this it's not proposed as an agreement as of yet, although it might ultimately culminate in a memorandum of agreement. That's something that I could discuss with the Navy's attorney. But in the jurisdictions that I'm aware of that have done this, it's been seen as a permanent action whereby there's a need that's not being fulfilled through the federal case system. And so the jurisdictions are asked for this letter of support to see what their willingness is to accept concurrent jurisdiction. But as I say, there's obviously always a level of discretion on whether or not you're actually going to step in and conduct the investigations and the prosecutions.
So do you currently have an agreement, jurisdiction to go on that base?
No.
So if a kid in the county, or anybody in the county, fled the law enforcement onto the base, you don't have jurisdiction, is that correct?
Correct.
I think Mr. Stone had a question. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead, Mr. Stone.
Mr. Chair, we have Tom Snelling who is Captain Copeland's chief of staff. He might be able to shed some more light on what we're trying to accomplish and what their shortcomings are. I was just going to say he might have a lot more information on that as well.
Good afternoon or good evening. So yes, I'm Tom Stanley, the South Potomac kind of chief of staff for the Navy base. I don't know if I have a ton more to add other than if we don't prosecute juveniles on the base and they won't be held accountable. I mean, we're very well asking that they will be in the community as far as being unprosecuted juveniles for serious crimes. For the most part, the Department of Justice doesn't have a mechanism to actually prosecute these individuals as it is.
So it's just a bit of a larger issue. As the sheriff stated, we don't have many cases. We're not looking for a ton of support. We don't estimate that this is going to be a big drain on the county. We were asked by DOD to seek this out. So if it's, and we're required to go back and say if the jurisdiction change doesn't work out, we just have to explain why there's circumstances that's not going to work.
So if the sheriff's office investigates a juvenile case on base, something occurs, let's say a shootout with the police, where does the liability fall?
Well, we currently have mutual aid support agreements with the county for support. Even if we have an active shooter that doesn't involve juveniles, sheriff's department standing by to assist, and they will come on as well. I believe the liabilities kind of fall where they, not being a lawyer, out of my element a little bit here, but I believe they fall where they lie as far as each individual entity will cover its own liabilities. Does that? Please, sir. Thank you.
If in fact that this proposal passes and we do end up with concurrent jurisdiction, and we went on the base to investigate that crime and something happened, it would be no different than investigating it in the county because we would have the jurisdiction to be there. So even though it's federal property, we have the jurisdiction to be there. So that onus of liability falls back on my office if we're there investigating it.
So when you go on base, though, do you have to, like quite often, if you go into another county, you need to, if you're going to arrest somebody in another county, you need to have the local county there with you when you do it. Do you need the base personnel there when you investigate or arrest a juvenile?
No, if it's concurrent jurisdiction, we have jurisdiction there. Like I don't have jurisdiction in Caroline, so I would have to advise them of what we were doing and possibly get somebody there. But with this proposal, it would give me the jurisdiction to essentially go to their post and say, we need to go talk to this guy on base, where now we can't do that. But with the concurrent jurisdiction, they would just have to waive us through.
Okay.
Because we have the jurisdiction.
So you can't do it now?
Correct.
And they want you to do it now?
No, that's
not correct?
They are asking us to start doing it because of they don't have that mechanism. And that's the whole purpose of what we're doing here tonight, is to get just a support from the county that would allow that concurrent jurisdiction. As it stands right now, if we needed to talk to somebody on base, we would have to stop at their gate, get their personnel to either go get them or escort, like you would say, in another jurisdiction, because we don't have the jurisdiction. But with this proposal, that would give us the jurisdiction, so they don't have to allow, escorts.
So just so I'm clear, the Navy doesn't do anything with juveniles?
Not currently. Basically, we're very limited as far as prosecution goes. We basically, if we think it's a serious enough crime or issue that it's unsafe for other residents, commanding officer of the base has the ability to bar those people from the base, put them on a list, ask them to leave. If they're actually residents, they could leave, or they could be listed as not being allowed on the base again. One of the other things I'd like to state with the sheriff's support is that the federal officers on the base, even if we had a crime of sexual misconduct, they're not really trained to collect the evidence in a way such that it would actually be as well usable in a state court. They're not trained for that. So if we had an incident, having people who have experience and professionalism or a specialization in those type of investigations for collecting evidence, I mean, our officers are standing by to assist, but they're not specialists in this stuff, those type of crimes. So that's where we would be in a more of a support mode to help out any way necessary with the investigations.
So,
Ms. Bender jumps in, we'll come back.
Yeah, I talked to Sheriff Giles earlier tonight. Thank you for the clarification. But, I've waffled a lot this mind since we had our conversation. And one of the things why I see it is important is we do have quite a few students that on the base that do go into our public schools. And if something happened in the public school, the people that it was, if there was a rape or something like that, those victims have a right to have justice. So this would give a way that our sheriffs can protect the citizens that don't live on base and be able to go in and investigate. So I can see an importance to that, especially of the relationship. We have a lot of people that live on base, or somebody could escape onto the base to try to get away. You know, I think it's important.
One scenario I would add to that is if we didn't have this agreement and there was a serious sexual misconduct and we didn't have the ability to prosecute them, we would bar them from the base. Now, if they're an employee, they're more likely to move out into the King George community, unprosecuted with crime underneath their belt that they didn't have any recourse to actually prosecute from. So it's kind of a unfortunate incident that would be the maximum we could do, is basically say they couldn't live on the base, but that didn't mean they couldn't live in King George, especially if they had parents that worked on the base.
So currently, if a juvenile commits a crime on base, he's pretty much, or she's pretty much safe as long as it doesn't go off the base. Is that accurate?
Safe as in free of prosecution?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we had incident of vandalism, and they're really criminally wise, there was nothing we could do. It was really just in the civil recourse, as far as making sure that the parents understood if they made restitution and paid for the damages, that we wouldn't bar them from the base. So that happened. That's pretty much the limit of what we can do when it comes to juvenile issues. We have no ability to actually prosecute with a crime or hold them in any way, shape, or form other than civil recourse, which would be like a barment and restitution if they're willing to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, I'd like to make a motion. And I would like to make the motion to execute a letter requesting that the Department of Navy relinquish exclusive jurisdiction of Naval Support Activity South Potomac and grant concurrent jurisdiction for criminal misconduct by juveniles.
Second.
All right, we have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. All right, thank you. We'll move on to County Administrator's reports. Board of Zoning Appeals annual reports.
Did want to call attention to the report of the Board of Zoning Adjustments. And that's an annual process that they provide you with a report. And then just wanted to talk to you about some of the things that are on the schedule coming up. Budget schedule, obviously, Cinco de Mayo, 6 p.m. here Friday night. Bring your ponchos and your sombreros, margarita glasses. But no, I'm kidding you. I know we have a lot of work to do. We still are obviously working through the budget, as you guys all indicated. But the other thing would be the night of the 11th, that is, and the 18th. Those are the Thursday night that we have open. Obviously, I know that you all want to try to get this resolved as much as possible. But if we have a meeting on the 11th, it will be at the Fire and Rescue Station number 1, which will be at 6 p.m. And then at the 18th would be here in this boardroom if you have that meeting, and it would be also at 6. End of the month, May 30th, Tuesday, boardroom, 6 p.m. here, dealing with the joint meeting of the Planning Commission, which is the second scheduled meeting. I know I have some non-capital to-do items that I can go through, but I was going to just mention, I've been told that tomorrow we will have flowing air. They are on the second floor, so we're happy to report that. So things will be cool, and maybe the fans will go away. But the General Properties Group has done a good job of oversight on that, and just wanted to let you know that. So to-do list, pretty lengthy on the non-capital items. Financial system replacement. They held meetings with the consultant that's working through the process. that was probably about a 2-week process in terms of meeting with the various departments, the various staff members that will be involved in the financial system overhaul. And so the next step will be obviously to choose a consultant that will be hired to do that work. But that process is unfolding and it's ongoing and it's on track. Personal property tax ordinance revisions, as you recall, you all made a decision back October timeframe to come in with a proration and also the rebates. So the plan, and I know we've discussed it as part of the budget, is that your proration process would begin on January 1. So we're still tracking that, and I know that there's some discussion about positions associated with that, which will be decided by you all in your budget. Formation of the Department of Social Services as a deviating agency, and that is something that I know that Mr. Franklin and his board are discussing. It's not something that's that they're immediately considering, but that is an option under state law that you can have your county Department of Social Services can deviate from the state. And that means that they would then come under the jurisdiction or the oversight of the county, not necessarily the oversight, but the administration of the county. They're already obviously through our personnel process, and then they, with payroll administration and some finance, they work with us. So I know that Mr. Franklin is familiar, obviously, with the county. I think it's just a matter of that process that they have to go through. The Phase 2 middle school turn lane project, obviously, that's scheduled for 2027. We've got the budget numbers committed in the existing capital plan, and we'll just continue that until the project gets going. The Route 206 no-through trucks, the last that we have heard is with the Commonwealth Board of Transportation. I believe they held a meeting, at which point there was some, it's a public hearing type process, and so we will just anticipate to hear back from them. We've not heard any change to that. Vehicle maintenance and facilities maintenance plan, I will admit to, this is something that we need to get some time on. We haven't had the time to put the attention that we need, but that's something that I think Mr. Muncy and I can start the process up with the facilities maintenance plan. Vehicle maintenance is pretty much handled through each department in the sense that a lot of our vehicles are on lease through Enterprise. It was something that the county started doing several years back. And so that's excluding the sheriff. I know the sheriff has his vehicle maintenance plan that he does, as well as the fire chief in terms of what they do. But we'll get to work on that and give you some information on that so that you understand what we're doing. Perkins Corner Convenience Center, that the expansion is kind of tied to what's known as the 21st Amendment. And I know the Landfill Advisory Committee is working through a lot of those discussions with the waste management folks. We're hoping that waste management will look at 2024, kind of the end of the calendar year of 2024 when they would start that. And so we'll keep you informed on that. The landfill fatal flaw analysis, so that sounds like a very drastic type of thing, but what that is essentially looking at the expansion capabilities. And that's again something that the Landfill Advisory Committee is working with that information as well in terms of what waste management is doing. Waste management is looking at the possibilities. I will tell you this, that the idea of expansion outward is sealed. It's not possible, and that won't happen. So the next step is probably going to be, do you do a vertical expansion? Their estimate of the years that the landfill could get if you did a vertical expansion was, I believe, another 5 years. it's worth it possibly to give us that 5 more years of landfill revenue. Otherwise, we're gonna have to start, I think, as a county, seriously, within the next 5 or so years, start looking at what's the future. You know, is it relocating another landfill, or is it we begin the process of looking at regional landfill participation in a regional facility? So, obviously, that's one of the things I know that you all are considering, and one of the things that is weighing on the minds of a lot of people in the county in terms of how do you replace that. So, Visualize and Rise Foundation, I know Ms. Lackey is working with the folks there, and obviously the group that the committee is working actively on the use of the Ralph Bunch building, and so I'm assuming we'll see something here in the future from Visualize and Rise and some of the other users of that facility. The reassessment committee, I think we need to just probably circle back and have a future discussion on it. I don't know if that's an item that you're ready to have as part of a regular meeting, or if that's something you'd want to maybe have a work session with the Commissioner of Revenue and kind of talk through what your interests in that committee are, if that's something that you're still looking at doing. Pyramid Health neighborhood considerations. Obviously, we have worked with them and addressed some of their concerns. I don't know if we're obviously giving them any satisfactory answers, but again, to my knowledge, they have filed paperwork. I believe there was a problem with the Pyramid Health deposit, is my understanding. And my understanding that they've been told that they can't write a check to the county. We don't know what the problem was, if it was a snafu or some kind of didn't have the funds available in the fund that they wrote the check from, but right now they are not been advised that they can't write a check to the county. They have to money order or cash. So we don't know what that means, and I don't have an update for you on that, but other than that. Salary survey, obviously, Mr. Messler started that process. The noise ordinance, there's, I guess, 2 noise ordinances in the sense that there's the noise ordinance that you all were talking about tonight, but then there's also the noise ordinance that other people have brought forward in another format, and I think that's something that we can bring back at the next meeting. And then you see the community development, economic development, zoning overhaul. We're on track, obviously. Second Industrial Park, Mr. Miner has a conceptual layout that SDI did, and he wants to bring it to a future meeting, perhaps this next meeting, to show you and tell you what the next steps are. And of course, the broadband project, which we're assuming is on track, and we will reach out to them to get them to come and do a regular kind of another update to the board. The FEMA Port Security Grant, the Sheriff's Office, that's for the boat, and as he, I think, reported at a previous meeting, they're ready to roll on that. So just an update. Any questions, I'll answer as best I can.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'm going to ask a question about write the check. Who said they can't write the check? I'm sorry, who's?
The Treasurer's Office.
The Treasurer's Office said they can't write a check to the county.
I think it's something to do with you bounce a check several times, then you're no longer allowed for a while to write a check.
So this check was for the purpose of?
The filings of the application.
So is the application in place if they haven't filed if they haven't paid for it yet?
I would have to get from Ms. Hall where the status of it. I think it just means that it's kind of sitting there. They can't act on it. They can't do anything on it.
We'd like to understand if this has any impact to their ability to move forward with the project from the perspective of if they haven't paid and now the ordinance has been changed so that it is by special exception only.
Yeah, I would have to defer to our attorney, but I don't know that it changes the fact that they've got a site development plan in place. It's our staff's not going to do anything until they get, just like somebody building a house. If they bounce a check, our staff's not going to do anything with their reviewing their plans until they make it right. So
I guess I was just asking, has the process even been considered started then if they haven't paid the funds in order to do that activity? Or just asking?
So I can look into that issue, but I believe that the text amendment was made to apply to future applications.
And so I guess I'm asking, is their application in if they haven't paid?
It's not in if they haven't paid.
That's what I'm asking.
I'm not sure that this is application so much as permitting. I'll confirm with community development.
I would appreciate it just to run it to ground, just to make sure. So
I think that your analysis might be correct on that.
well, I'm hopeful, but we'll wait for staff to provide feedback.
Can't wait.
Just looking for any recourse that we possibly can, or any avenues we can pursue in that regards. I'm sorry, I had no other questions. Did any of my colleagues have any questions for Mr. Miller?
Yes, I'd like some more information on the formation of the Department of Social Services, a deviating agency from the state of Virginia. I don't even know what that means. That's new information for me. Does that mean that we're going to be taking over Social Services Department? If so, if that's the kind of what that means, we need to look at all that before it seemed to be slipped in there real quick in your report.
it's been on the to-do list because Mr. Franklin and I had the conversation when I first came here about this subject, and he indicated that that's one of the options that is available to Department of Social Services at the county level. It doesn't mean that it's happening. I obviously, whatever is approved has to be approved by the board. I mean, it wouldn't be something that I'm gonna, as you say, slip in. It's more of a as a possibility. I know that in years past there were issues in the Department of Social Services, and I think what Mr. Franklin was looking for was possibly a way to avoid those kind of things from happening in the past. It's not saying that the state can't do the job, but it is an option available to social services departments statewide.
I'd like to have more information on that.
Yes, sir. We would plan on doing that. And Mr. Franklin hasn't really, I'll be honest with you, it's not high on their list, but it's something that I felt you need to know as a possibility sometime in the future.
The expansion of Perkins Corner Convenience Center. Ms. Lackey, you just, or Mr. Miller spoke about the 21st Amendment and with the waste management. I mean, last meeting I asked, where was that at? Where was that negotiations at? Where is it at now?
Waste Management has put a pause in negotiation. They've expressed concerns about actions by the Landfill Advisory Committee. They're awaiting resolution of those issues.
The Landfill Advisory Committee is an advisory committee. They can't take any formal action on anything. So it doesn't affect the bargaining power of the county or waste management as regards to the financial of the 21st Amendment. I think that's nonsense for them to put a pause to that. I think you need to put some pressure on them for that. And then if they don't want to negotiate, then we'll the tonnage they're allowed to dump, it comes up here in 2024, and we can use that for leverage if they don't want to negotiate. So we need to do something now, not wait for them to worry about the Landfill Advisory Committee. I saw the email that you sent in regards to that, and I don't know where that lawyer come up with some of that information because I was there, and I think that's nonsense that using that as an excuse not to negotiate. I'm looking for a response from you.
So I believe that Waste Management's attorney is planning to attend at least virtually the Landfill Advisory Committee meeting next week. Hopefully we can clarify what actions of the Landfill Advisory Committee require approvals or changes by the Board of Supervisors, and those will be items that I'll bring back to the board. And it's not that they're completely unwilling to have continued discussions. Waste Management's also getting some additional information that I've requested. And I think Pete Kistner's on at a conference this week, for example. So they're still being responsive, but they've expressed that they have concerns that they would like to see resolved before they involve any more commitments.
Just to backtrack on this, has nothing to do with the Landfill Advisory Committee. This has to do with their financial responsibility. So the Landfill Advisory Committee has nothing to do with the 21st Amendment, nothing. So nothing needs to be brought back to this Board of Supervisors other than the negotiation that whether or not what the financial, because we're asking for more money to run the convenience centers. And so it's you've been negotiating with them, but we haven't heard anything from them. What's the answer? Yes or no?
I think the other aspect of the expansion is, you know, obviously I think their point they would love to just give you money and then us be responsible for it. We have told them we want them to do the work because, you know, money you give us now and then money in 3 years may be worthless in terms of the cost of services and the cost of construction. But, you know, I think that everybody agrees that they're going to do the expansion. It's just trying to get.
No, that's the convenience center expansion, not the expansion.
No, I know. I was talking about the convenience center. Yes, sir.
So, you know, the expansion of the landfill, we do there to put more waste there. We do have that bargaining power also. So they need to step up. You know, something needs to happen instead of this just fluttering along the way it has been going, which is nothing. So what I'm asking for is, I'd like to hear what their proposal is.
Could you share with them? Obviously, the board made a decision tonight in order to make a change to the charter in order to identify a board member as a member of the advisory committee. And so just so they understand where that stands and see if that.
Sure, I'd be happy to communicate. I don't think they're meaning to say that they are not going to negotiate. They just want to be clear what the role and function of the Landfill Advisory Committee is going forward in case that's something they want to address in the amendment in some way or other. The host agreement does provide for a representative of Waste Management to be on the Landfill Advisory Committee, so that's their primary concern.
And that's an ex officio member, correct?
It's not specified any voting rights in the host agreement.
Okay.
No.
Ms. Bender? Mr. Stono?
No, sir.
Okay. In that case, unless there's any other business to bring before the board, I'll entertain a motion, and it will not be the 11th, it will be the 5th.
I do have one more little thing of business for Mr. Dines.
Apologies, go ahead.
We need a new battery in our official clock. And you're the tallest one in the room.
That's Mr. Muncie's responsibility.
I will take on that role. I can reach there very easily. Thank you.
Since you're the tallest one in the group, so. And outside of that, I would like to make a motion to adjourn to Friday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo at 6 p.m. here in the boardroom.
We have a motion properly seconded. Do we have any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We're adjourned.